Because of operating difficulties, there has been a delay in the start of the program. We expect to present the program in a short time. Meanwhile, we bring you an interlude of recorded music.
Welcome to a special edition of the Liberty Lifestyle Podcast. In this episode, Derrick Broze of the Conscious Resistance Network gives his Decentralize Your Life tour presentation from the Jackalope Freedom Festival in 2017. Derrick is a freelance journalist from Houston, Texas. He writes for the Activist Post, the Anti-Media, and Mint Press News. He also does videos and articles for the Conscious Resistance Network. Thank you for joining us on this journey. We look forward to having you with us in the future on Liberty Lifestyle Podcast, giving true the liberty of appearing.
Hey, give it up one more time for Johnny. We also have our buddy Jeffrey, who's around here somewhere. They both live in the Freethinker house along with myself, and Miriam's there all the time. And they're going to be jamming after I wrap up in just a little bit. In relation to the question about, I think it was how to communicate with anarcho-communists or maybe just any other group that there seems to be massive division. I actually wrote a chapter about this in my new book it's called Can Propertarians and Non-Propertarians Coexist? And we do these different thought experiments about like post-state future, no government world, and one person moves in who believes private property is, the key to freedom, and the person next door has some other different ideas. So I do think that ultimately it's going to come down to, as Johnny said, empathy and us as individuals working to evolve ourselves, and that's kind of what my talk is going to focus on. Because other than that, I mean, in the long run, nothing else really matters. We can advance, these philosophies and these ideas, but if we don't even have the ability to communicate non-violently and to have empathy for other people and to have compassion for ourselves as well, like he was saying, like not just putting other, I think as an individual that if we focus on ourselves individually, we come together as stronger people. That's how you build strong communities, so we have to find some way to work with people who are going to be here, unless we just want all-out war, in the future, because that's what it's going to come down to, is like, hey, I disagree with you, I'm willing to kill you over it, I disagree with you, I'm willing to kill you over it. So it's either constant war or trying to work with people. But thank you guys for being here. Jackalope number 6?
Yeah.
6? Alright, cool. This is my 4th year being here. It's great to be here, and it's a beautiful place. I love this forest. I love being here. And you just heard from Johnny. Before that, for those who were here, Miriam was doing a meditation. As I said earlier, we're on a national tour, 52 cities. It's called the Decentralize Your Life Tour. Bitcoin.com is one of our sponsors, among a few others who support our anti-state black and gray market message, and they're happy to support us in our efforts to spread these ideas all over the country. So we're here tonight. We've been here for a couple days. We're headed to Colorado tomorrow, and we've still got 2.5 weeks left on the tour, and we may be going to your friend's city, so let them know if they want to hear these ideas and experience meditation and everything that you've heard so far. But so the whole goal of the tour, it's called the Decentralize Your Life Tour, is to give people tools, talk about, we're talking to people. The cool thing is, like right here, generally, I think I'm speaking for the most part. I know, I don't want to, say for everybody, but for the most part, I'm looking around, and people that I know or that I know found their way here are kind of already friendly to the anarchist, freedom, voluntarist, libertarian, whatever label you use, agorist message generally, and we all agree by the non-aggression principle, and we're not here to harm each other. We're here to just experience freedom in a world where we can spend money and exchange ideas in business without state involvement or corporate power involved as well. So I feel like I'm among friends. But the cool thing about this tour is it's taking us to, like, I've basically in the last few months, I'm going to get into a little bit about who I am and how that relates to what we're doing here for those who don't know me. But for those who do, in the past few months, I've made a really active, conscious effort to start moving away from the anarchist movement, the libertarian movement, and to stop being involved in these conferences and to stop going specifically to these places, because, I've done it now I've been an activist for 7 years, and I think involved and been speaking publicly for 4 years now in the U.S. and now in Mexico, and I think that I have some new ideas and things that are interest to that crowd, but really I've seen that these ideas have a much broader appeal. So I'm getting booked at like transformational festivals and like cryptocurrency things and just a mix of things that aren't explicitly anarchist. And so on the tour, we're at yoga centers, we're in people's backyards, we're in meditation centers, we're and we're in Sedona. We were talking to a group of people who everybody in the room was probably 50, 55 or older, and didn't identify as an anarchist or libertarian or anything like that, but conceptually I'm able to get them to understand why it's important, and I think that's something that's really beautiful that I just want to share with you guys because we're experiencing that on the tour. And we do plan to do this again, and I'm thinking, I have a vision of long-term of how to keep growing this movement, you know, for myself and the community in Houston, and to work with and all these beautiful people we're encountering around the country. And I really think we're at the point where things like Jackalope are great, and Anarcho-Poco and all these different conferences, sometimes they serve a purpose, they introduce new people to the ideas. Sometimes, let's be honest, they're just preaching to the choir and everybody there is already on the same page. We're having a good time, but the movement doesn't necessarily grow. So I'm really thinking of long-term generational, and as somebody who practices agorism and counter-economics, which I'll break down in just a bit, I think generationally, and I'm thinking of like long-term future. And so for myself, the next few years is just dedicating to this. You know, we're going to do another tour at least one more time next year, and there's people who want us to come to Europe and other places who are already building freedom cells or mutual aid groups, just different names that people have called these ideas of, you know, people coming together and organizing locally and decentralizing, unplugging, vacating the state, all these great ideas. So I'm just dedicating as much of my life as I can, you know, through, like I've got the books out to propagandize that message. As a journalist, I try to write articles that help people realize the problems with corporate and state power, so in hopes that they will let go of it and then start seeking solutions, you know. So it's all, everything I'm doing is very strategic and purposeful, and I think that we're probably at the point where we should start thinking in that way and thinking of, if we really want freedom in our lifetimes, what's it going to take and what are we willing to do? And that's what my talk's going to focus on tonight. So the tour has been great. Every city we're visiting, we're doing what we call action days. We're either feeding the homeless. One city we were helping repair a community's septic tanks, so we're like shoveling gravel. We've been going to permaculture gardens, ecology centers, community gardens, urban gardens. We helped one neighbor in Phoenix, like Mike connected us to Mercedes, who just needed some help moving her stuff to a better place. So we were just there like doing weed whacking and moving boxes and just whatever the community, people who reached out once we started playing this tour and said, hey, I'd like you to come to Sedona, I'd like you to come here. So we start working with them and we ask them to please find us a way we can contribute to your community. I didn't want to just come through and be like, here's my books, pay attention to me, these are the ideas we have. We want to learn from the places we're visiting, and actually, you know, I think it's respectful and necessary in any movement, and especially conflicts, let's say like Standing Rock or some other conflict. People come from across the world, across the country to another community, and they try to tell them how they should run their stuff, and I think that's really not a good thing, and that's something that activists have a tendency to do. So in the same sense, when we're visiting a place, I want to learn from those people and contribute in some way. So we've been doing these action days every city. It's been very rewarding, and just, I mean, we're constantly blown away. I'm telling you, there's so many good people out there working on beautiful ideas, unplugging, decentralizing, not just from the state, but from all other mechanisms of power as well that don't serve our communities. And then in the evening after the action days, we do these events where we do the meditation, we talk about our community space, and I give this talk, and then the guys close out with music. So we're doing that all around the country, and people are responding very well. And as I said, the crowds are really diverse. We're talking to like high school, college, radical-minded people just starting to kind of look into philosophy and looking for answers, to people in their 50s and 60s who are, you know, just maybe burnt out on politics and trying to look for a different answer, a different idea, and then, you know, everything in between. And so it's been beautiful. And also the cool thing is, as I said about breaking away, not keeping my work or my efforts exclusively to one movement, at the venues, we're like at LGBT community centers. We're working with the Ubuntu community and like zeitgeist communities in some cities. Like, you know, we're not restricting ourselves. I think that's an important lesson as well, is that if we're really going to grow these ideas, we got to check our egos and stop thinking that, as some people do, like, oh, we've got it all figured out over here, we got it all figured out over here. None of us got it figured out. We may have some good ideas. There's brilliant people who've written lots of things and theories, and there's important principles that should be held on to and should be explored and promoted, and that's important. But none of us really have the answers to what things are going to look like theoretically in the future, and so you know, I think that it's important to remember that and not get so caught up. So we're doing the tour, and now I'm going to tell you a little bit about, you know, for those who don't know who I am and why the hell I'm on tour, or how I got on tour. I'm a journalist, freelance journalist from Houston, Texas. I'm 32 years old, been based there for my whole life and moved around here and there. 7 years ago, I started a community called the Houston Freethinkers that Johnny was talking about. And we have the community space called the Freethinker House, where we do documentary screenings. We've got a community garden. We do skill shares. We do monthly benefit shows. I also have a promotion company in Houston, so we put on a twice yearly music festival that some people here have been. It's called For the Community, and it's essentially the same thing. It's just a big-ass free party where we have 3 stages across 2 venues, 70, 80 artists sometimes that we work with, local musicians, plus out-of-state musicians, some of them that we've met here at Jackalope and brought to Houston, and other activists who also are creators and musicians. And then we have a big agora where it's just like a marketplace of all local food, local vendors, local crafts. Of course, we're not taking any taxes out of any of that. They pay a small fee, so it's all grassroots done and community volunteer. We've just started to make above 0 now. We're coming up to number 14 in November. You guys are all invited to come stay at our house and experience this, because we've created something really beautiful. Again, we don't market it as an anarchist event or a libertarian event or a freedom event. It's just come here and the people experience what freedom is like. They're there and there's people of all ages, all backgrounds. We don't stick with one genre of music, which brings all kinds of different people because everybody likes different kinds of things. So you've got this open marketplace. In between the musicians, we've got speakers. I'll give some talks. We'll have people from local community groups, or we've had people from this movement come out and speak in Houston. So it's music, it's ideas, there's poetry involved, there's the agora happening right there, and the whole thing is free. So we get 1,200 to 1,500 people that come out. It's been promoted in all the local papers and all that good stuff. But at the end of the day, for me, this is just another form of activism. Like, I'm just trying to get people here, experience this, get the ideas in their head. We've got our table. Like, hey, if you want to know more about what we do, check out the Houston Freethinkers table. We've got, info. And we always pull new people in through that. And so we've been doing that for 5 years, along with all the other activities. And, when it's time, we get some power space. Oh, shit.
Oh. I got another battery for that. I'll replace it in a little bit.
Okay,
I can hear you.
Yeah, we can probably hear you.
Move in this way.
We're all good.
Sweet. Okay, so, when there's a need, we still do protesting and all that good stuff. But really, over the years, both, I think, my energy and the people who come to our meetings, because we hold monthly meetings, and they've gone from, wanting to be out in the streets holding signs and cop watching exclusively, doing those things, to like, hey, teach me how to garden, or let's learn skills together. They're looking for solutions. People are looking for ideas. There's a lot of people there's always going to be constant people just like waking up to things in the world, so to speak. But once you get past that point, you get to a point of like, okay, what the hell do I do now? You just either live with this information and you do nothing, so you just go about your life, and I think that's pretty inconsistent from what our goals seem to be, or you actually start making changes. And that's what I'm trying to focus on. And so, yeah, I've been involved with the Houston Freethinkers and all these beautiful things. We've done so many, we raised thousands of dollars for this group or that group and worked with musicians. We're the only city in the country to successfully kick the TSA off our bus line. They tried to introduce it there, and we organized to kick them out of there. So that was pretty cool. That was in 2012. And along bus line? Yeah, they had this program called Bus Safe, Operation Bus Safe, and it basically was if you bought a metro ticket or rail ticket anywhere in the city, you would be subject to random bag searches, ID checks, and like bag.
Just to ride the bus, like not even fly an airplane?
Just to ride the bus. So they had that, they announced that program. They had like DHS and TSA and all the local cops and officials out there, and one of our members happened to be there and snap some pictures, so we organized to go to the Metro next board meeting. And these are like stuffy board meetings. Nobody's ever at them. All of a sudden like 200 people show up and they're like in there quoting Benjamin Franklin and just stuff. And then so they were just like, whoa, we weren't prepared for this. We need to set a second meeting and then we'll deal with this. Like they were trying to act totally clueless. The second meeting we brought even more people, and then by the end of that meeting they just shut the whole program down. So we didn't even have to go through city council. And those are things that I'm proud of, and I'm thankful that we've been able to do that. And that's, so all the strategies and the ideas we've been using over the 7 years, that's what have gone into my books and, my efforts. Now we're trying to just basically replicate that and also at the same time, as I said, learn from what other people are doing. Sharing ideas and learning is the goal. So along the way, also, I started to get journalism opportunities, and I now write for the Anti-Media, Activist Post, Mint Press News. I have a radio station on KPFT in Houston. And do all different forms of journalism, and then I've written books. But I really, I want to tell you a little bit about myself as far as how this journey started, and hopefully by the end of the talk you'll understand why I'm sharing this information. And I want to also preface this with saying that the four of us here are really just vessels for ideas. Like, as you guys understand, these ideas are bigger than any of us, So I only share my story so that you get to understand me a little bit
little bit better and understand why we focus on the meditation and the healing aspect of what we're promoting, not just like exclusively like understanding philosophy, but focusing on some other aspects. So I just want to say that, you know, I'm just sharing this so that we know each other a little deeper. But before I got into the Freethinkers, I started actually 7 years ago this summer, 2010, first as a blog and eventually real world events and meetings and such. But my awakening actually began much earlier, and some of you have heard the story that 12 years ago I was addicted to crystal meth, and I went to prison for first time for 11 months, and basically over a 3 or 4 year period I did 18 months. And that was really, you know, when I started to like, okay, it was like a week before I turned 21, I'm getting locked up. So I had to, you know, question everything I was doing, and that is so awesome. That is so awesome.
You just figured out something.
Yeah.
I know, that's the best.
She
All
said,
right.
this is fun.
So I had to, you know, I went into that situation just like, holy crap, what did I do? You know, I'm looking at the calendar, like, you know, my mom can't help me, my friends can't help me, my lawyer can't help me, like, I'm stuck here for like the next year at least. The first sentence, as I said, was 11 months. So I really just started to do a lot of self-reflection, and I started to, well, one day I read the Houston Chronicle, the Saturday paper. They always have a listing of, in the religion section, they'll have like quotes from the Bible or the Dhammapada or the Quran and different things. And I read one from the Dhammapada, which is sometimes known as the Buddhist Bible. It's a set of verses from the Buddha. And I don't remember which one it was, but it was something that just kind of struck me to the core, and I immediately got my family to start sending me chapter by chapter. And I just started to get into meditation. I got a book sent to me from my grandma and just started meditating while I was in prison. And it was a very interesting place to start that process of self-discovery, because, you know, you're in a place based on a lot of fear and a lot of primitive, low-level thinking, in the sense that, like, there's racism, it's a whole other ecosystem. It's a completely different culture, you know. So there's a lot of things that, yeah, I just had to be around. And so to be in that, that's what really helped me and helped me get through that time. But as I'm starting this process of self-reflection and I'm going through that, I realized that I was had been suppressing, you know, years and years of things that were going on within me personally. That's why I started even trying crystal meth. And before crystal meth, it was Xanax for like 6 months, and before that it was like ecstasy till I was like a zombie, and then before that it was 18 beer bongs a night, you know, or 20 shots a night. I was like that guy who was, you know, the train wreck every party you went to, and puking everywhere and just falling down. And that didn't start till I got out of high school, and preceding that, like pretty much the first 15, 16, 17 years of my life, I attempted to kill myself several times, and I'd experienced some deep stages of depression. You know, some of my earliest memories at like 5, 6 years old are visiting my father in prison, and definitely having thoughts that I think, you know, would be considered suicidal. And so it was a very interesting experience at such a young age to start questioning these things, kind of questioning your own mortality in a way. And looking back, once I started to do that digging while I was locked up behind bars and just getting into these, getting into self-reflection, getting to meditation, I started to see like a very clear path of where my personal trauma was coming from. And it was that, you know, my father has been in prison for my entire life for his drug addiction. He's in his early 50s now, and he's still locked up. He's been locked up since I was 2 years old, and he's been free for, I think, a total of 1 year of my life, you know, in that time. So he has, you know, his own battles that he's going through. And then before that, you know, my grandfather and my grandma had them when they were like 13, 14 years old, and he was selling drugs for them by the time he was 9 years old. You know, they eventually got off that and moved on to their lives, became successful people, but he's never recovered. My great-grandfather, my grandpa's dad, he was also apparently abusive. He hung himself in prison. And there's just this very clear like pattern on both sides of my family, actually in the males, like of alcoholism and drug abuse and depression and physical abuse. And so, you know, I had to do a lot of personal introspection and come to my conclusions about, okay, wow, I can see like this is things that at the time I didn't necessarily have the tools to deal with. I guess I would just go, I would go visit him in prison, and he would write letters and make certain promises that maybe he meant at the time when he said them, but was just incapable of keeping them. And, you know, obviously as a very young child who, even if we don't understand what the words mother and father mean, we have this connection, you know, or whatever your parental status is, the people that are closest to you that are taking care of you, you understand what that means. And so I think I felt a sense of something was missing, you know, and then I would go visit this person, and it's like, why are we going behind these giant walls of razor wire, and they're telling my mom and grandma to cover up, and like we'd get to visit him for like an hour, and he'd have like a black eye from some fight, and we'd hang out, I'd be hanging all over him, and it's like, all right, see you later. And then, you know, my mom would, certain days would just like come tell us like, hey, I found out he's already back in prison, you know, this and that. Or he'd come visit us one time and then go back, and So it was a lot of just like cycling through that. And then when I was about 14, I basically got to a point where I was just like, fuck this, I'm never gonna, and I just really, I put a hard shell around myself. I was like, I'm never gonna let anybody hurt me again. And, you know, all through high school, I was in, you know, I was doing well in school. I graduated early and all that kind of stuff, but people knew me as the dude that was like throwing chairs at teachers and getting fights and getting arrested at school. And I guess that's just how I was processing those things at the time. And then eventually, once I graduated, that's when I started to experiment with like drinking and all that, and that kind of led till eventually I tried crystal. And within 10 months of trying crystal, it was like I lost my apartment, or I lost my job. Then these guys moved into my place. We started selling like a lot of different drugs together, and then eventually got evicted out of there and was living on the streets and started living at a crack and meth house for a while until I got myself sober, and then came back to my parents. And unfortunately, I was still selling drugs. Interesting now with my views, I'm like, well, I guess I was just trying to be an entrepreneur, but I was also involved in it for the wrong reasons. Like I definitely, like, even though now today, like I don't credit prison at all for like the changes I've made. And you know, prison didn't help me. Like I made a personal choice because I know plenty of people that I met when I was first locked up who are dead, who are still cycling through that system, and who got it like before I did. You know, it took me a couple times. I got locked up the first time, then I was only up for 5 months. They sent me back another 3. Like, so I did a couple years while I was getting my lessons. You know, so even today, I don't think that people who choose to use crystal meth, as destructive as it is, should be put away, because I didn't need to be put in a cell. Like I needed somebody to talk to. Like is what I really needed at the time, and that's why this was just a way for me to escape and deal with it. And now it's easy for me to look back, like holy shit, like I was definitely on this path of self-destruction. And so, you know, as I started to get older, I just went through that cycle, and I also had a lot of trouble with trusting people. And so these situations, these feelings, and these traumas basically went unresolved until I got locked up and I started to do this self-reflection, started to meditate, started to journal a whole lot, and was able to actually come meet him one time face to face and like just say, like, I think I was 28 when I got to talk to him, and just like, this is who I am today, like this is everything I'm doing, you know, this and that, and had this really kind of, this really interesting like role reversal of like giving advice to him, you know, like, and you still have time to get your shit together, you're 50 years old, whatever now, like you could still like, you're going to be on parole for the rest of your life, but like you can still, you know, you have 30 years, 40 years maybe, you can do something different. I know you don't want to live with your mom, and you don't want to be dealing with this prison for the rest of his life, and it's just a really, you know, and he's got his shit to figure out, you know, but I realized that like, the reason I came to him is because I had to let it go for myself, you know, it was about myself and my personal development. And then so those things happened, and then along the way, like once I got out of prison, I like now a part of the drug war, I started to do a lot of research about the drug war, found out about, you know, the history of specifically cannabis, like racism and money being involved with the creation of some of the first drug laws in the U.S. and, you know, laws aimed at the Chinese migrant workers or the black jazz musicians or, the Mexican migrant workers, or just different propaganda that they put out. And so I started to just go down my rabbit holes, and that eventually led me to, you know, questioning things both in a political nature and more of maybe a conspiratorial nature. And that is what led to the creation of the Houston Freethinkers. And, you know, 7 years later, like, here I am today. So I had no plans to get into journalism or any of those things. And the reason I bring that up is because that's why my work explores the intersection of spirituality and anarchism, both the pursuit of freedom in the sense of this physical world and opposing the state and corporate structures that limit our ability to express ourselves in the truest sense, and also the deeper internal struggle against the internal tyrant, our own limitations, our own personal doubts and fears and insecurities that no matter, I don't care who you are and you know how big you build yourself up, we all deal with doubts, fears, and insecurities in different ways. They express themselves in different ways in different people based on their own environment, their own, you know, just their own self. And I think by learning about those things we can start to become the best versions of ourselves, basically. You know, I don't know if there's a sense where we're ever going to be completely self-actualized people, but I mean, like, we can set the bar, we can aim in the same way that we're aiming to create a world free of force and violence via government or other entities, and we want people to abide by basic respect and self-ownership and the non-aggression principle. In that same sense, I want us all to be able to be the most whole people that we can on the individual levels. So, as I said, I've written 3 books now, and the main strategy that you heard from Johnny earlier that we're trying to use to do this, I'm going to talk about 2 different concepts, and I'm trying not to talk too long. Agorism and counter-economics first, and then what I call holistic anarchism. They're going to be the main points, and I'm going to throw out some names of different apps and stuff, and you can ask me about them later or ask questions whenever, and and names. I have a lot of references, but all the info's in the book, and we can talk about it after. But so, is anybody here not familiar with the philosophy of agorism or agorism? Ever heard that? Anybody? Cool. Okay, so then this is a good place to explain it. So basically, like many people in this freedom movement, libertarian movement, people started looking at what are the possibilities for actually creating this future we want, where we respect each other's basic freedom to be our self-owners and to live as we please, as long as we're not infringing with anybody else's ability to do the same. And one of the people who was an activist and who was a theorist for these ideas was active in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. He died in 2004. His name was Samuel Konkin III. And he came up with the idea of agorism or agorism, depending on your accent. But what he realized is if we're ever going to get to a place where we can create a world that does not have systemic force and violence via government, and I would say also corporate influence and corporate powers, he recognized that voting wasn't going to be the path towards that. And I think in today's, he's writing this in the 60s and 70s, and now today I think it should be perfectly obvious to everybody here that like that's not the change we're going to find is not coming through the political systems. Maybe there's still some hope on local level, but as I said, like we've worked a lot locally, and the city council is just as corrupt as some of the other places, and they'll just sit there and laugh in your face and ignore you if they want to. If they don't care, what you're talking about is not on their agenda, then you're not going to get very far with them. But maybe there's still some work that can be done with voting on a local level to stop, violations of our freedom. But for the most part, voting in a presidential election, federal level, is just a complete farce, and that's been proven time and time again. Konkin recognized this. He also recognized that ideas like insurrection, violently overthrowing the government, or just decapitate the king, the man on the throne, and of course what happens? Somebody else replaces him. Not only is that like a bad strategy, I mean these people have drones, they've got LRAD sound cannons, I've been tased and pepper sprayed by them. They got plenty of toys to play with that we don't have, and it's also not in line with our values. It goes against the idea of the non-aggression principle, the non-aggression axiom. Even though I personally think that we are under constant threat of the state, but insurrection, violent revolution is inconsistent with what I believe, and it's not a good strategy. So if you remove that from your toolbox, you remove voting, and you remove political action, and you remove violence, then what are you left with? What Konkin talked about, what he envisioned was this place in the future where we would be able to have this free exchange of ideas and communication and business and goods without corporate or state interference, without this taxation, without all of this involuntary action that we see today. And so the reason he called it agorism is the word is based on the agora, which is the Greek word for the marketplace. In ancient Athens, this is the place where everybody came together there was political debates, there was exchanging of goods and all sorts of stuff. And so he saw this as this kind of idealized future, the agora that we could reach. And the path, he said, towards the agora, not voting, not violence, a third path that he offered, which is what he called counter-economics. So counter-economics is simply all peaceful, non-violent economic activity that the state considers to be illegal or illicit in the sense that they want you to get licenses and permits and stuff for that. So, for example, in Houston, we opened up a business, organic gardening business called Organic Gardens for All, and we have a website. You can call us and we can arrange and do business and tell us what you want, and we'll come and build it, and we can make that happen. But that's all it is. It's a website. We never registered with the state, city government, to get a DBA or any sort of license. It's just us with an idea. Hey, we can build gardens with people, And when we do that with people, nobody ever asks, do you guys have a license to do this? Do you have a permit to build this garden for me? So what that does, that's what Konkin called the gray market, because that's the area where the state would like you to get those permission slips. And what that means is we're not paying them any of our money to do what two people want to do, in the same sense of like ride sharing and Airbnb type of things. Now Uber, Lyft, and Airbnb, I don't think they're perfect and they're not fully agorist, but they are a step in the right direction as far as decentralization is concerned. Because if two people want to arrange, like, hey, I'd like to get a ride to the other side of town. Can anybody help me? And you're like, yeah, I can do that. We agree upon a price and a currency, and boom, there's no reason for a third party involved in that. And so Uber and Lyft, when they first came out, they were kind of cutting into the taxi monopoly that has the control of most major cities. And in Houston, for sure, the taxi monopoly came out to fight to try to get Uber, and people they wanted they need to be paying as much taxes as us, and they need to be doing all these different instead of saying, hey, why can't we have the same deal as them and be cut out of that? They were like, they need to be paying as much as us. But so they brought in some decentralization, but the problem is somebody like me, I haven't paid taxes in 7 years. I don't have a bank account. I don't have a credit card. These tools, these apps, they want you to have like a credit card on file. So for someone like me, it's completely useless. Also, there are better ideas out there, because another problem with Uber and Lyft is that they get to set the price, you know. So it's not the driver. Basically, I understand you could say, well, you're using their tool. Well, there's also people out there who will do open source peer-to-peer tools like Arcade City, and now the Sell 411 app has a ride-sharing mechanism to it as well. So those are completely decentralized, and all it is two people coming together again to exchange a ride, and you guys get to decide, hey, okay, that'll take me $10 to get you across town. Cool. Do you take Bitcoin?
What are the name of those apps?
One of them is called Arcade City, and I don't know if they fully created the app yet, but they have Facebook groups. So what you do is just the same thing as you just go and look Arcade City, your city, and like Houston or whatever, and then you post and they're like, hey, I'm looking for a ride to wherever, and somebody will comment back and let you know. And then they usually, some of them are ex-Uber and Lyft drivers too, so they'll share their profile, like of their rating and all that kind of stuff. But I think their long-term goal is to have an app. Yeah. But the Sell 411 app that I'm going to talk about in a different way also has a ride-sharing thing. It's basically just sending out an alert saying, like, you know, I'm looking for a ride.
Oh, Sell 411.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, my brain
exactly.
wasn't. Yeah,
no,
I
you're
have
cool.
that. Yeah.
So anybody who sees that alert on Sell 411, which we'll talk more about in a moment, can then respond and say, yeah, I'll give you a ride to the other side of town. And again, so that's bringing in decentralization. That's part of the counter economy. That's people just doing business without the money going to fund the state's wars or fund the state's surveillance or you know, any other program that you don't like. And also, I think most people here would understand this. This sometimes is like a touchy spot when I'm talking to people who haven't quite fully grasped that government itself is force. And if you're among that, then please stay with me. You know, even I always talk about like, oh, this is good because it takes our money away from the state. It doesn't fund the programs that we don't like, but it also doesn't fund the programs that you do like. And sometimes that's where people have trouble. They're like, well, hold on, like, what about that universal health care I want? Or what about the money for, you know, the homeless or the money for the elderly? Well, the whole goal is that basically, whether these funds are good or not, like, the government took them by force. It took the money to pay for them by force, you know? So that's the whole goal. Is like, again, if we're trying to be consistent, if you recognize that, like, if I come over to you and I say, like, dude, I want to solve the homeless problem in Sedona, this is what I'm going to do. Starting next week, I'm going to take $100 out of your check and everybody's check here, and then, you know, we'll solve the problem. You know, you might be like, I like the idea, dude, it's really cool, but I don't think I want to, you know, I don't think I want to give into that. And you would basically call me a thief if I took that money out of your pocket every week to fund that program. But for some reason, people have a hard time connecting that with the idea of government itself. So, you know, we have to remember that the idea applies to using counter economics in the gray market and the black market, areas where the state says it's completely illegal. Like, for example, and this is another controversial one, prostitution. You know, if prostitution is two people coming together voluntarily and consensually, you know, that's what I'm explicitly saying. Like, any other circumstances are not what, you know, we're talking about non-violent black market activity. If you don't own your body enough to you know, if you don't own the fruits of your labor, and you don't own yourself, then I don't really think you're free, you know. So if you're not free to say, like, hey, I'd like to exchange sexual activity with you, and like, let's agree upon a price, like, hey, like, it may not be your cup of tea, but that's somebody's freedom to do so. And so that would be part of the black market. And basically what Compton's getting at here is by removing our economic support and our moral support from the state and from the corporate partners, we're taking away their supply. Like, I mean, basically they're feeding off of our taxes. They're feeding off of, like, not only our moral support and continued use of their system through the Federal Reserve note and everything that the political system entails, but we're also literally allowing the dollar and, you know, Federal Reserve note to continue by our use of it. So that's why he encouraged, and the cool thing is, some of the things he predicted actually have happened. You know, he died in 2004, before YouTube came out, before social media really become what it is, and before Bitcoin. But he was writing, like, technology is going to help us decentralize, and kind of had these theories that, you know, he was seeing the beginning of computers in the 70s and 80s. So he was already like, this is going to change shit. Like, this is going to revolutionize things. And so it's really cool. He predicted this 4-stage pathway that he thought society would pass through on the way towards agorism. And I think we're kind of at the late first stage, early second stage. You know, it's just his ideas, but they're pretty interesting because he talks about these pockets of agora starting to take place. And that's what we're seeing happen with cryptocurrency and Bitcoin and a lot of these ideas is people are localizing, they're decentralizing, they're coming together. You know, most farmers markets, if you're going to the farmers market and buying produce or whatever, there's typically no taxes involved in that. Like, you know, a lot of times it's just, at least the ones that I've been to, I mean, I'm sure there's other places that are like highly status and everybody there is like paying taxes just to be there. But that's another reason why in our community we host this festival and we host these type of markets, because we want to show people like, hey, look, this is just how free people can do business. So Conklin talked about counter economics, exploiting the gray and black markets taking our money away from the state as much as possible, and when possible, not even using their currency, not even using the dollar. You know, so this would include ideas like barter networks, of course, cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, Ethereum, and many others. Localized currencies. We were up in Humboldt County, Trinidad, California, and the guy there was showing us like some of these old Humboldt books that he had, and it was really cool. It said like, in each other we trust, creating economic independence, and they had all these cool pictures on them. And they, you know, these things take work, but at one point he said they had it where like different people in the community were accepting them, and so it was starting, just those ideas. Anytime you can do a transaction without involving the state is a good thing. And the other thing is, even if you are still using the Federal Reserve note, still being able to do things without taxes involved is at least, I think that's like the first foray into that, okay? Like you're doing the farmers markets, or you're doing yard sales. Like most people already participate in the gray market without even realizing it. But what we need now is more of a sort of evolutionary class consciousness, if you will, of people to recognize, hey, we're doing something powerful here. This actually has an effect. Like if we're moving our money and our time and energy away from the system, that's going to have an effect. So that's part of the goal of the tour, is just to tighten these strings together and to bring people together. So Konkin, as I said, he envisioned this 4-stage thing that society would pass through. He didn't really describe how the individual might progress through this stage, and that's what my co-author John Vibes and I have been focused on, and our new book is called Manifesto of the Free Humans. If you guys haven't seen, our table just around this corner that way, and we've got freebitcoin.com swag, pens, all that kind of good stuff if anybody wants some, and we have shirts and my books, and also individual chapters. But what our book focuses on is trying to show how does the individual progress through these stages, and some of the ideas we've come up with are what we call vertical and horizontal agorism. So in the book we have this kind of grid. In the bottom left corner you see statism. That's like where we're at now. Statism, authoritarianism, control of our lives, limiting our interactions and our freedom in different ways. And then in the top right, which is wherever you aim to go, you would have agorism, freedom, you know, this idea. So you have here we are right now, and then you have this goal that you're trying to ascend to. And using either a vertical or horizontal strategy, it's basically just trying to map ideas and a pathway for each of us, no matter what situation you're in. So, as I said earlier, I'm 32 years old, I'm unmarried, I have no kids, so I have the freedom to be on the road for 6 weeks at a time and just spread these ideas and commit my life to this. But I recognize that we're not all in that situation. So John and I wanted to develop strategies that people could use at any point in their life, no matter their circumstances, because sometimes I'll talk to people who are like, man, I'm right with you, but you know, I got 3 kids I got to feed, so I can't quit my corporate job or this or that. And you know, I've also had people who've come up to me in the past few months and said, I just quit my private defense contractor job I had for 20 years because I finally just got sick of it, you know. So there is hope, I think, in getting away from situations you don't like. But the whole goal is to give people tools no matter where they're at. You know, I realize that we're not just talking to people who are young activists who are free to just dedicate, you know, their full energy and who maybe want to go flirt with the gray and black market. Because in case you didn't catch it earlier, I was encouraging you to break the law when it comes to the black and gray market, because I think most people here would understand. It's like usually I get some weird looks and shifts in the chairs on that part whenever we're on the tour, but I think most of you guys understand that good people disobey bad laws, and that if you use the state as your barometer for what's right, then that allows not only things from the past like slavery and genocide, but also like right now, according to the state, they could indefinitely detain any of us if they suspect us of terrorism. You know, they think it's illegal for them to drone American citizens with their bombs in other countries, and a lot of different things that are technically legal. So if you're using the state for your barometer of what's right and wrong, you're going to end up in a bad place. So that's why I say, like, it's up to us to really use not just our economic power, but our moral support, and take that away, vacate the state as much as possible. And with the vertical and horizontal strategy, I think that's one of the ways. So I'm just going to list off a few different ideas. And remember, this isn't designed or meant to be all-encompassing or really one single path you need to take. But for example, if you wanted to start decentralizing, get involved in the gray and black market, the vertical, horizontal agorism, you start a backyard garden, you know, a herb garden in your windowsill, front yard garden, get involved, volunteer at a community garden, or help build one, go out guerrilla garden. Any of these steps that you're taking, they're not only taking you away from a system that is dependent on statism, which is, you know, some people would call it the Monsanto food production complex, but I'm not just talking about the corporatism involved with Monsanto and the pesticide companies, but also the fact that the distribution system that we have in this country of food is completely unsustainable. You know, it's dependent on Mexico or California or just different places where all the crops are centered on. So when those supply chains break down, the rest of us who haven't prepared and have no food or just haven't built a community and have resources and people to lean on, you're going to be in a bad situation. So that may not explicitly be agorist in the sense of maybe you're still using the state's currency to build these things or to go to the farmer's market, but it's every step that you take towards bringing yourself away from those systems, the more strong you are as an individual. So I think that's why I call this holistic, because for so long people have focused exclusively on promoting libertarian philosophy in the sense of like very strict interpretations of what that means, but also thinking that if we know all the names of the philosophers and we know all the different debates and we know the ins and outs of the political system, that's enough. But I think it's much deeper than that. There are many other ways that our lives are contributing to the problems that we see. It's not just about understanding that. I mean, you can know all the ins and outs of the political system and understand the non-aggression principle back and forth, and yes, you would still be a libertarian and anarchist, but if your daily habits and the way you live your life are still contributing to statism, then that's a problem, But again, it's a personal thing that you need to think about. So the first step would be the gardening. That's, again, moving yourself away from the food production system, getting involved with cryptocurrency, local currencies, alternative currencies. So that's moving economic power away. You're moving away from statism towards freedom in this system. Also, creating neighborhood watch groups or joining one. One of the ways Johnny was talking about the Nextdoor app, that's definitely an app you want to check out. It's a private social network geared specifically for your neighborhood. So instead of blasting out an event or something you need in your community to people on Facebook who are all over the world, and it's cool to have friends all over through Facebook, but when you need something local, that doesn't really help you much. So Nextdoor is a private social network geared towards that. What it does, it allows you to search your address and you can find the people around you. It'll show you greenhouses are people who've joined the network and red houses are people who haven't. And there's a bulletin board, you can create events, do all the things you can do on Facebook, but it's targeted to the people right there next to you. So you can do just your neighborhood or the 5 neighborhoods around you. So we'll post hey guys, we're having a potluck dinner coming up, or we're having a garden day, or we'll post on there, we have veggies for sale from our garden, come by and check out the garden. Other people will put hey, we lost a dog, or watch out, somebody's been breaking into houses, So it's just bringing back that kind of neighborhood feel, but through a digital app. And it's really great as well, even though those people aren't specifically freedom-minded, it's a way to get those ideas into that community, and that's what we've been trying to do, is okay, this allows us to connect with the people closest to us. And at the end of the day, if you're facing some economic turmoil, think of whatever sort of zombie apocalypse type scenario you want to think about, it's going to be helpful to have people local and close to you that are at least on similar footing, similar, understanding of the concepts, and who aren't going to be completely dependent on government, Because otherwise, what are you surrounding yourself with a bunch of people who are going to be working against what your goals are? That's going to be not very easy to deal with. So gardening in different ways, alternative currencies, cryptocurrencies, creating or joining neighborhood watches. The next concept that I want to talk about is, and this is another step in there in the mechanism, is basically the whole idea is bringing people together in small groups and then forming larger groups with that. What I call freedom cells, which a friend of mine, John Bush, he coined the specific term freedom cells. This is another mechanism to the how of how do we move between these stages. What we're trying to do, and a goal of the group, and what we've really been doing already, is planting seeds to help people organize in local small groups. They're also historically have been known as affinity groups or mutual aid groups, but the idea is bringing people together, 8 to 10 people in small groups that are based peer-to-peer decentralized groups for the purpose of sharing knowledge and sharing skills, and I think in the long term also defending our communities. So what we've done in Houston is we've had this core freedom cell that we started out with, and we wanted to make sure that everybody understood what permaculture was about, right? So we divided up, you two take permaculture on land, you two take permaculture with water. We divide up the topic, we go learn everything we can, meet again in 2 weeks and teach each other. So we're sharing skills right there. Maybe we go hold a camp out one weekend, we teach each other all how to build a fire, or we teach each other CPR, practical skills. It can also be helpful to make sure everybody in your group has some form of encrypted communication, to keep yourself, if you need to communicate something sensitive. Maybe you want to make sure everybody in your group has 3 months worth of backup supply of food. It's not about preparing for the end of the world. People like my grandmother in her 80s who has a farm in Kentucky, has grown up every single week taking her crops out of the garden or just buying stuff from the store and then canning it and storing it in her cellar, just because that's what you do. You just be prepared. It doesn't have to be about doom and gloom. It can just be about being prepared. In Houston, when we have hurricane warnings, the whole city shuts down because all the stores empty out. People are trying to get on the freeway, everything just chaos, and that can be a difficult situation. Whenever the hurricanes do hit, you've got FEMA in town offering help, you've got people, just trying to get whatever they can from the grocery stores. You might be faced a situation where FEMA's down the street and they say they've got everything your family needs, all you need to do is come stay at our camp, or you can go downtown and try to loot and riot to get whatever you can for your family, or you can be the ones who we're proactive and we're building community, not just preparing for the doomsday, but because I think it's a more enriching, fulfilling way to live that's in line with our values, taking care of ourselves, not dependent on other systems outside of our communities. And then from that standpoint, you're able to say, hey, here's some seeds, here's some tools, like don't go over there and do that, like help yourself a little bit, and to start building that community. So with Freedom Cells, the goal is to bring people together to share skills, share knowledge, and as I said, the idea can be really applied infinite number of ways. One of the ways that I think long-term that we're trying to get to is defending our communities. You know, I think we'll never really be free until we're actually able to defend our communities, and this is something in the future that we have to work towards, but it's worth mentioning for at least a moment, that until we're able to stop, you know, we're visiting people on this tour. We visited a community in Texas where it's a peaceful parenting, unschooling community, and they wanted us to come talk about Freedom Cells and this particular aspect of defense, because they're like, well, what happens if the CPS tries to come take our kids because we don't vaccinate them, or because they don't like the way we teach them, or they don't like our, you know, spiritual, religious beliefs or whatever? You know, how can we defend ourselves? And so these are things, realistic things that people are worried about. People are worried about now getting taken by ICE agents, or getting taken by, you know, getting extorted by IRS agents because they refuse to pay for taxes, or whatever it may be. Or it could just be a violent, average street criminal coming into your community. We have to find ways to take care of ourselves and not be dependent on state institutions. And at the end of the day, the police, not all cops are bad, I'm not saying that, but the institution itself is the enforcement arm of the state. When the state comes in and says, hey, we want these people off our streets, they're going to be the ones to come push you off the streets, tase you, pepper spray you, hit you in the head, whatever they got to do to get you off the streets. So we have to find ways to stop supporting them as well, and being more reliant on our own communities. And I think apps like Cell 411, has anybody here heard of Cell 411?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Cell 411 is an app that you can download, and as it sounds, it lets you form cells of groups. And I want to mention the reason the Freedom Cell term comes from is, for years there's been propaganda about like terror cells, you know, the government putting out all this stuff. We wanted to create cells, groups of people coming together for freedom, for truth, for love, for these ideas. But also the concept is that each individual cell, like each individual cell in your body, is performing its own task. It has a job, but at the same time it's a part of this larger collective organism that makes up you. So in the end, what we want is people coming together and organizing their first small groups, and, you know, like I said, maybe they're sharing skills, they're sharing knowledge. You want your group to have some form of self-defense. For some people that might mean making sure everybody in their group is proficient in the use of firearms. Other people might just want to take a self-defense class together, or take a martial arts class together. But you could have, you know, defense, you could have encrypted communication, storing food, learning skills, sharing knowledge. You know, this concept, even in the book we talk about one newer kind of example. The state puts out some fake news stuff, and you have one group, one cell dedicated just to completely researching and dissecting that propaganda and like letting, hey, this is fake, or this is accurate, you know. So the concept can be applied a number of different ways. But the goal long term would be is, as you have your original core group of people, and they're not all going to, you know, to me, ultimately, the number isn't explicitly important. You know, we say 8 to 10, but we started out with smaller than that because I don't think it's about waiting to get this special number. It's about just starting to come together in smaller groups, localizing, decentralizing. And the way that after you get that core group, though, say you get to 8 people or 7, 8 people, then you encourage each member to turn around and start a secondary group. You know, so then you have 8 groups of 8 to 10 people organizing across the community. And that's when we get to that defense I was talking about. Maybe the Cell 411 app comes in. Through Cell 411, you can send out emergency alerts. Rather than calling the cops, you send out an alert that says, hey, I'm being mugged, or I got pulled over, I have a flat tire, I'm being bullied, or just a general alert.
Border Patrol checkpoint.
Border Patrol checkpoint. And everybody in your cell will get that alert, and then whoever's close by can come render aid, whether that means help you change your tire, or come film the cop that's harassing you, or something else. I envision as well, when it comes to defense, that we can actually get to the point where we have enough freedom cells in the community, and you know, the cops who are coming in violently, or the agents of the state that are coming violently, can be turned away, hopefully, and first step non-violently, but assertively remove them from our communities. So I'm going to give you an example of this. I've been to Ferguson, been to the Boston bombing, and I also reported in Standing Rock 3 different times. I've been in the face of the police state and seen them highly organized, busting out their LRAD sound cannons, lethal weapons, non-lethal weapons, tasers, batons, beanbag guns. These people are coordinated and organized. You know, I was in Ferguson. On one side of the street, I'm watching all the activists fight each other and argue, and on the other side, you just see the Humvees pulling up one by one, and just people out getting in line. You know, these people know what they're doing. They're very prepared. I think our communities need to be just as prepared, not for violence, but for defense. And we talk about these kind of ideas theoretically. Okay, what happens? We saw Eric Garner and plenty of other people still get killed by police on camera. So obviously, filming doesn't necessarily stop violence. It's good that it got documented, it goes out there. But then at the end of the day, the state is going to let these people go anyway. So what did the filming help us any? I don't know. It's arguable. So I played this idea over in my head, like, what would I do if I'm faced with this situation? I watch somebody just getting thrown to the ground and violently accosted, whether, again, it's an IRS agent, common criminal, cop, or other person. Am I just going to stand there and film, or what would I do? And as I've thought about it more and more, and now I'm actually facing a case in Houston for this exact situation, like, I tried to intervene, basically. I got in the cop's face, but what I've thought in my head is, well, what if we had a freedom cell, we start role-playing? Somebody gets to be the asshole cop, and somebody gets to be the person that's getting, turned around. And, you witness it, you send out an alert, your group comes in. How do you guys circle around? We used to do these cop-watching role-playing. You had, okay, there's the situation. The first person comes in, two people, like, flank them at a certain angle so you can cover all angles, and then two people further back. I mean, so there's practical steps that we can take. This is already happening, though. Like, you'll find several examples on YouTube of communities, cops coming in, sometimes not even, like, they're off-duty cops, and they'll come in for whatever reason, they'll start trying to arrest somebody, and to me, the circumstances are irrelevant. Like, even if this person is a criminal, supposedly we live in a system of justice where the cop's job is to arrest them and take them so they can be proven guilty or not to beat them on the street. So one way or another, I disagree with that. But so you have somebody who's getting accosted by the cop, and the community is like, hey, what's going on? We're not going to let this happen. And it's completely disorganized, but sometimes they'll de-escalate the situation and they'll have a disarrest, and the cop will just like, it's not worth my time, screw it, I'm leaving. And the community's cool, everything's fine. But what would happen, what would this look like if it was more organized, if we actually practice for this? And then if across the country, our communities are starting to, again, peacefully but assertively defend ourselves. Like if you see somebody getting violently abused and an alert goes out and 2 or 3 freedom cells come together to form a larger group of people, maybe some of them are peacefully, non-violently open carrying and just like, yo, what the hell's going on? If need be, disarm the cop, whatever, send them out. Hey, let HPD know they're no longer welcome in our communities. We're going to take care of ourselves. Like, as I said, long term. But these are things that realistically I think should be talked about and should be thought about. And one of the beautiful things is that this is already happening. We've seen it in Detroit. Johnny mentioned I went to Detroit to do some journalism out there. And I went there to cover the water situation, among other things. And out there they have this group called the Detroit Water Brigade. And so it's a completely corporatized city. Corporations owe millions of dollars. They get to keep their football stadiums on and everything. Grandma owes like $150. They come to turn off her water. Like that's, they're doing that all over the city. So the Detroit Water Brigade, at first they were a reaction. They're like, okay, we're just going to come bring water to everybody who's had turned off water. Obviously that's not very sustainable. Like how do you, it's a lot of work to do. So then they started being more proactive, and I don't know if they were using Cell 411, but they had some way to kind of get the word out. And when they heard, hey, trucks are going to Miss Johnson's house, they call them groups of angels. And so these groups of angels would just show up and they'd link arms and they'd surround the house and they wouldn't let the trucks in. And sometimes that would only maybe help them for a day or so, but the goal was like they were actually like affecting the people. Like, look, we got a crowd of people from the community, they're not letting us in, so they would leave. And so they started doing that. So it's the same concept, just being able to start actively defending our communities in the long run. So we've talked about alternative currencies and cryptocurrencies, localized currencies, barter networks, time banking, skill shares, free schools, just different ways to use your time and your value and not give it to the state. Growing your own food, community gardening, urban farming, getting away from the food production system, getting away from the pesticides and from all these industries that if you look at them, if you study them, they're a result of statism.
When you say time banking, what do you mean by time banking?
So time banking is a concept I've seen in a few different places. We tried it in Houston, but it just kind of evolved into a free school for us. But the way I originally saw it was basically you'll have like a list of classes, like somebody's like, hey, knitting or Spanish, just different skills because the cool thing is we realize that everybody in our community has some skill to offer. You may do different things that are so common to you, so second nature that you don't even think like other people don't know how to do this. And you can offer that to your community, and then we all level up together. That's the other idea of the freedom cells, that the knowledge is shared, the power is diffused. You're not dependent on one single person. But the idea of time banking is, so everybody's offering their skills. Like you say, okay, I'll teach a 2-hour intro to welding class. Then that gives you 2 hours of credits to take any of the other classes.
Okay.
So there's no money exchanged in that, but in the same way, anytime you're not using the state's currency,
I've seen
I think
time
that's a
banks
win.
work as well for like if you've got projects around the house, like someone needs a patio dug or they need some help removing trees from the property.
Could
or
you use
whatever.
it with
Same
your
idea.
children?
What?
Could you use it with children?
Absolutely.
That seems like a very natural
No,
way to
it's
use
absolutely a natural way to do it. No.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
So there's so many different ways for us to organize. The goal is, again, and I'm going to start wrapping it up here. I know I'm kind of long-winded.
Love listening to you, Derrick.
Thank you, brother. Is to bring this back to why I call it holistic anarchism. So the website I run is theconsciousresistance.com. Please check it out. It's an open source thing. Anybody who has ideas here, that whether you write or make videos, where anybody can join, and we help promote them through our social media. And as my work grows, other people's work grows is the goal. But that idea it came to me in 2013. As I was saying earlier with my sort of awakening story, I got it. After I got out of the drug addiction and all that heavy stuff, depression and suicide, and I started to wake up to what was going on in the world. At first, I was running in these activist circles where, I don't know if you guys noticed, and it's fine to be an atheist if you want, but I personally am a very spiritual person, as I've illustrated. But I remember when I was first getting involved in this movement, it was a lot of atheist-minded people, and very open atheists. Not just atheists in the sense of that's what they are, but bashing people who had spiritual curiosity or beliefs of whatever nature. So for years, I kind of just all right, well, I'll keep that, in my meditation circles and my, consciousness groups. So I had these two different sides of myself that I was really balancing out, until eventually I got to a place and realized, these are two shades of who I am, and I can't separate them. I think the message is one and the same, that we need both internal healing and we need to, repair the damage done by the state and to break free in that way. Break free in the internal sense, in the emotional sense, the spiritual sense, and break free in a physical sense. So that's what I've been calling the conscious resistance, basically just the realization that the struggle for freedom is both an internal and an external one. But over time, and as John and I have written these books, I realized that the holistic anarchism phrase is a little bit more accurate to what we're trying to do. So anarchism, as most people here I think understand, is without rulers, without authority. It simply means that it's not what we've all been propagandized to believe, that it's Molotov cocktails and destruction. And the sad thing is, anarchist history, if you study it, it does have people who chose what they called propaganda of the deed, or as I said, they believed insurrection, violent acts would somehow spur about this theoretical revolution they had. So because of those tactics and because of propaganda from the mainstream, like The Purge too, anarchy, and it's anytime a movie uses the word anarchy, they mean chaos. So because of that, we have a lot of work to do as far as getting people to think otherwise. But at the end of the day, I don't even really care if you identify as an anarchist, libertarian, agorist, etc. I don't care if you call them freedom cells, as long as you're organizing, as long as you get the concepts. That's what really matters to me. And the basic idea of being an anarchist is just that you recognize that you own yourself, and that so does everybody else. And once you recognize that you own yourself, which, as Johnny said earlier, is very difficult to do until you learn to love yourself. And I mean, even me saying that now, it took me a long time to get to the point to say I value myself, I love myself. I think that despite my flaws, I'm a fairly good human being. I'm doing my best. And that took a long time to get to that point. And I used to I remember just laughing and sort of just talking down to people who I would see would express that sort of self-love and self-esteem. And it was because I was just, very deflective about that they're silly, they're corny or whatever, But now I realize that without that, without that first step towards self-esteem and self-value, it's very hard to care about what's going on in the world. You can't very much care about what the state's doing and what their corporate partners are doing, the destruction of the environment, the loss of freedoms, all these different things, if you can't even get up in the morning and feel good about yourself. It's very difficult to, at least. Or if you do find out about those things and you're still lacking self-love, I've seen people go a very angry stage, where they're just they're stuck in that anger mode, what I call the Alex Jones phase. And that's
that phase.
And I think we all go through it, because the reality is it's a grieving process. That when you all of a sudden realize, holy shit, everything I've ever been taught about the world is not what I thought. History is maybe not what I thought it was really about. Health is different, the government, all these different things. It can be a grieving process, and it takes a while to get to the acceptance. And I think some people really will get stuck in that. Either you'll just go to well, I guess things are screwed. I guess I'm going to be apathetic now. There's nothing I can do. And I don't think that helps us any. Or they just stay in that sort of anger, we need to kill those people. We need to do this. They have so much hate for this enemy, which I can understand in a sense. And I think it does take a bit of righteous anger and awareness to recognize what we're dealing with. But we have to redirect that in a way that's actually going to achieve our goals. So that's what anarchism is about. It's about self-ownership, and it's about recognizing that you're a beautiful, free human being, and so you're surrounded by so many other free, beautiful people, and they're capable of doing so much. And once you recognize that about yourself, and you see that around others, it's a lot easier. Okay, well, I don't necessarily like that life choice of theirs. I don't like that they smoke. I don't like that they drink. I don't like their choice of, sexual orientation, or I don't like this or that. But that's their freedom to do so. It's not harming me. I'm gonna go live my life, And if you don't want to associate with them, that's your freedom to do so. That's what anarchism is. The holistic aspect comes in because holistic, when you look at the word, the true meaning of holistic and coming from the philosophy of holism, it's about dealing with systems in whole parts rather than just simply focusing on the individual parts. So holistic medicine, as some of you are aware, it focuses on the whole body, looking for the root of an illness rather than just treating the symptom. Whereas holistic ecology, it studies the environment and humanity as one object rather than separating them as individual parts. So in the same sense, holistic anarchism asks us to look at the entire scope of things, not just, as I said earlier, understanding all the philosophies and reading these books in and out, which I think are helpful and interesting and educational, and not just knowing what Trump's up to today or what law passed this or that, but also looking at your own individual actions, your own individual life. And this is where I think it's really important for personal responsibility comes into play, because I think we all accept that. Like, if we're ever going to have a world without government, a world without corporate influence in our lives, it's going to involve a lot of personal responsibility. We have to step up to the plate to actually be those free people we're capable of doing. And that's why we're doing this tour. That's why we're volunteering in every city, because we want to show people, here's how people take care of each other. Here's steps you can take. You really can't talk about volunteerism if you're not living it. I mean, at least that's my scope. I feel like there's a lot of people who talk online about these ideas, but we haven't shown anybody, well, what is a voluntary, how do we get there? What does it look like for people to take care of each other? Let's show them through our actions, So holistic anarchism asks you to examine each individual aspect of your life and to see where the inconsistencies are. And then from that standpoint, you can decide on your own, is it really worth it? Some of us say we want freedom, but maybe you examine your life and you say, damn, there's a lot of work I got to do. Yeah, you know what, it sounded nice, but I'll just stay in this comfortable job and this comfortable life and just keep paying taxes and, I'll do what I can here. And again, it's not about me or us judging anybody. It's just about each of us as an individual coming to that point and deciding what's best for us. So in the book, Manifesto of the Free Humans, John and I talk about this a few different times, and we reference the need for an honest personal self-assessment. That's what we all need, right? We each need to have this self-assessment of our actions and our habits. But in the book, I realized since reading it, since it's been out in April, that it might be a little vague, and maybe the average person reads it and they're like, oh, that sounds good, honest self-assessment, but they don't go any further than that. So I'm actually, since this tour started, I've been working on a new thing that's probably going to be some kind of workbook that you can write in and that I can print out a whole bunch and just give to people. That'll hopefully be a very simple but effective way to walk yourself through your own life and define these inconsistencies. And then from there, again, you as an individual decide, is this worth my time to make this change? So what I'd like to do just for the last couple minutes here is give you just the first couple pages of this workbook that I'm working on, and just take these ideas and see if you can understand where I'm going with it. So the first page, you open it up and there's a space for you to put down your name, you. So some people write their first name, some people write their full name or nickname. Just write down your name, what you identify as, and when you think of this self, this human being that you are. Then also what you want to do is write down the characteristics that you associate with yourself. So, are you thinking of, do you have a positive view of yourself? Do you have a negative view of yourself? Think about all these different attributes that you consider to be you. And what you might find is that you associate who you are with your job or your spouse or, as Johnny said, the money in your bank account, all these different things that are characteristics, attributes of you, but they're not really you. They don't get at the heart of who you are. And I think this first step should probably take quite a bit of time for us to really sit down. And this is, I think, what I was doing while I was locked up in prison, is having this honest self-assessment, getting to know myself on a deeper level. So that's the first step, is write down your name, write down the characteristics that come to mind of who you think you are. And if you see this, you're like, wow, this is really crazy. I didn't realize that I put so much emphasis on my profession in relation to who I am. Maybe that's something I want to work on. Because we have to remember, we're not our jobs, we're not our money, we're not our houses, we're not our cars, or these objects. We're much more than that. So that's important to recognize. So turn the page. At the top you have goals. Now what is a goal? A goal is an object that we want to possess, it's an experience we want to have, it's something we want to bring towards ourselves, right? So you would want to write down your short-term and your long-term goals. This could be like, I'm trying to lose some weight to look good on the beach by the end of the summer. Long-term, like, I want a family to be happy and free and healthy, and I want a farm, this, whatever your goals are, long-term and short-term, spend some time on that. Then below that you would have principles. So a principle is something that's supposed to guide you in your daily actions, and really I think in every action you make. The problem, and I think most of us understand this as well, is that there are a lot of people that are either too tired, too exhausted, just working 60, 70, 80 hours a week. They don't have time to come home, or they haven't quite made the time to come home and spend 5 minutes at the end of the day. Just let me think about what I did from the moment I woke up to the moment I'm about to go to sleep, and just stop and self-reflect. And that's such a powerful experience. Even just that 5 minutes a day can really help you get some clarity. And when you face difficult situations, you're able to bring yourself back to that balance and not let external things like the state or other people's actions push you one way or the other, because you're rooted in yourself. So it's important to understand the principles that you have, because as I said, most people are so busy they don't even have time to stop and self-reflect enough to say, well, what are the principles that are guiding my actions? This is why every 4 to 8 years they're swayed by the political parties and the lies and the promises of these politicians, because they don't know what it is that they really value. They don't know what it is that they really want. They're just like, okay, well, I'll make this decision. Well, then I'm making this decision. So sit there and think about that. I think for most of us, we would say that at least one of the guiding principles is the non-aggression axiom, the non-aggression principle, the golden rule, again, self-ownership, and that you have no right to infringe upon another person, and the only time violence should be used is in self-defense of one's own person and property. So that's something that, for me, it not only guides my interactions with other human beings, it guides the way that I want to apply agriculture, which is why I'm interested in permaculture, and it guides my diet, which I have my views on the non-aggression principle applying to animals as well. So it comes into every decision I make, and I stop and I ask myself, like, whatever I'm going to do, or I try to at least, is something I strive for. Like, is this action going to cause harm? Is this action going to cause force or violence? And there might be others that guide you as well. But it's important to spend some time on that again, because if the average person hasn't even stopped to figure out what it is that's motivating them and guiding them in their actions, they might sit there and be like, wow, like, you know what, like, I'm really inconsistent. I'm all over the place. Like, these things don't line up with what I say I want. So first page, you, characteristics of yourself. What do you think about yourself? Positive, negative view. Turn the page. You got goals, long-term, short-term, principles. Write down what are the principles that apply to you. Turn the page. Then you have your habits and your relationships. So habits are your vices, your thoughts, your actions. These are things that you're doing, just in your regular life. So this is where you start to be able to examine and see some of these inconsistencies, right? So maybe your goal is, one of your short-term goals, as I said, was have a beach body by the end of the summer. But then you look at your habits and you're like, well, shit, I sleep till 4 p.m. every day and I'm eating Hostess cakes all the time. Like, that's an obvious inconsistency, right? So that's very easy to see, and you can be like, okay, well, maybe I didn't really want the beach body. Or, you know what, like, that's inconsistent. Like, I'm not really being about what I'm talking about. Let me line that up. Again, it's a personal choice. Each of us, it's not for me to say, you're living your life wrong, you're not an anarchist or you're a statist or whatever. It's going to take each of us to make these personal decisions. And then think about that more related to our movement itself, right? You say long term, you want a world without force and violence. You want to get rid of the state, or you want to abolish involuntary government, involuntary taxation. You want to end the Federal Reserve, or just all these different goals, right? But then you look at your habits and you're like, well, shit, I'm using their currency in every purchase I made. I haven't even looked into Bitcoin. I haven't even looked into alternative currencies or time banking or any of these ideas. I really haven't taken any steps to get towards this long-term goal. I guess I'm just assuming somebody else is going to do it. And then you can start to make those changes. You can start to see where those inconsistencies are. The next big block here, and this is where I'm going to wrap it up, would go back to what I was talking about earlier. You look at your economy, not only what type of currency are you using the Federal Reserve note, are you using Bitcoin or cryptocurrency, but also the idea of boycotting, using the power of your dollar. If you're still supporting these institutions, for example, companies that directly benefit from statism, that get tax breaks or get money from the government, if you're still supporting them through your purchasing, then we're shooting ourselves in the foot. We're working against ourselves. Absolutely. So we have to look in that, decentralize and add consistency to the kind of money we're using, where we spend our money. Then again, back to the food. Are you supporting those unsustainable food production systems? Are you supporting the destructive agricultural practices, or are you supporting the local farmers and the local markets? Or are you growing some of your own food? Between our community garden that we have at our house, I've grown all my greens. I haven't had to buy any greens from the grocery store since we moved in October. And between that and going to the farmer's market twice a week, like 80 to 90% of my food is coming from locally. And then, whatever I don't need, or maybe some other specialty items that I want, I go to the store for. So that puts me in a place that I'm a lot less dependent on that system in case it's not there tomorrow. That's you need to remember that. So the economy, the food production system, both, and I think it's also important to examine diet along with the type of food production that we're supporting, and supporting local growing. Also looking into education. This is another beautiful way that the internet, sure, bud.
Sorry, that's kind of a change of subject. Where in Houston are you at It's a huge city.
Right in East downtown. We're literally in downtown.
Okay.
Yeah. Then you have education. Now, the beautiful thing about decentralization and the age that we're living in is that we have the power to educate ourselves now. I mean, I think have you guys heard of Khan Academy? It's an online K through 12 education system. There's also edx.org. I've taken journalism classes from there. It's college level classes taught by Harvard professors, Yale professors, Berkeley, all these different professors, and it's free online to take. They have all kinds of classes, and you can pay a little extra if you want a certification to prove that you've done it. But beyond that, I mean, there's also YouTube University, where every awesome person learns something, films themselves, and loads it online for the rest of us to figure it out. So there's just so many different ways that we're able to take our education into our hands that we don't necessarily need to rely on the state, and also putting our future children in debt to go towards being taught by the state and reinforcing their propaganda. Also, I think that this comes in line with the idea, I'm not a parent yet, but the ideas of peaceful parenting and maybe unschooling, or at the very least just being more involved with your child's education and not just leaving the future, the education of the future generations up to the state. I think that's a very, very fatal mistake to make. So you have the economy and the food production system and education, and then it gets back to our own interpersonal relationships, because as I said earlier, whether you look up Samuel Konkin and you read the New Libertarian Manifesto, or you know Murray Rothbard, or you know Kropotkin and all these different anarchists and their philosophies and the beauty of their work, and you know the ins and outs of the political system, if you're an asshole at the end of the day, then nobody's going to want to work with you. And if you're still all beat up inside and you haven't worked on your own internal disputes, then you're not going to get very far. I believe even if we were to implement, if freedom cells continue to grow as we're already seeing them grow, and these alternative communities, pockets of agorism and counter-economics come into play, and we're using cryptocurrency to break away from the state, and the state's getting weaker, and we somehow push past that, if we have not done the individual internal healing that is necessary, and it's going to look different for each of us in our own experience, I believe that we will cycle back and create the exact same thing, if not worse. We'll have a bunch of ego-filled anarchists who think they know what's right and what's wrong, telling each other what to do. And just like every other revolution in the past that has tried to use force or force their way, they become the monsters that they were fighting. So I think that's important to remember, and that's what the holistic approach is all about. It's not just about the libertarian philosophy and those sort of things. It's about examining every area of your life and looking for inconsistencies and trying to identify and then rectify that. And that takes each of us as individuals saying, like, I actually want this. I don't want to just come to Jackalope for the rest of my life and watch things get worse and worse and worse while we get smaller and smaller. Like, no, the goal is to grow this, and I mean, isn't that what we really want? We want to live in a world without this violence, and we want to live in a world that actually respects the health and the wealth of our local communities, and we do that through decentralization. We do that through localization, by unplugging and vacating through the state. I believe agorism and counter-economics are part of that, and as well as personal spiritual development. And I'm going to end with you guys the way I do every night, and along my journey I realized the power of staying in my head and getting into my own head and knowing myself, because whether it's corporate advertising or YouTube ads or the propaganda from the government or whatever it may be, somebody's always trying to get in your headspace. I've been trying to get in your headspace for the last hour, but for positive reasons. So why not be the one that's in control of that, and be rooted? So again, as I said earlier, if you know your principles, you know your values, you know what guides you, you're not swaying in the wind, you're rooted in yourself, and it's a lot easier to come from that balanced state of mind. So positive affirmations is one of the tools that have helped me along the way, just sort of reaffirm what I'm trying to create in the world. And it's not meant to be a mindless mantra where you just like, oh, let me just, some people in the spiritual communities that I've run into over the years, they'd be like, don't talk to me about what's happening because you're going to create it. And I really think that's just sticking our heads in the sand. We have to address the problems to really be able to change them. Mm-hmm. So with acknowledging that, to me it's like I have to take the thoughts out of my head, speak them out into the universe, or let somebody else hear them. It's like, okay, now it's been created, and then take the action to make it a reality. And positive affirmations have been one of the helpful ways for me to do that. So if you feel inclined, please join me with this positive affirmation, then I'll let you guys go for the night. I am powerful.
I am powerful.
I am beautiful.
I am beautiful.
I am free.
I am free.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Woo! I love you, Derrick.
If there are no questions, we have some music coming up.
Mike over here has Agorist Ales. He's got home.
Oh, yeah.
Support your local agorists.
Ananda has